Hey there guys, it is Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me yet again. This video is about the timeline of the few years surrounding the destruction of the temple, the Jewish temple, and Jerusalem in 70 AD. And this is a viewer request. I got this request actually quite a while ago, so it's a little embarrassing that it took me this long to get to this topic and actually compile the information for a video. And I will admit I had a little help. I found a source that gave me a tremendous amount of timeline information that had been extracted from the Wars of the Jews by Josephus in the first century. So that was a big boost. I used a couple other sources, but I'm going to make huge mention of the website Bible.ca. And so I encourage you to go there. It's a resource that I have found a tremendous amount of information on. And honestly, it's truly a magnum opus. The people or person responsible for that site is super impressive. They have put so much time and energy into that website. I encourage you, go to Bible.ca and check out the information that it contains. It is incredible. But just to show you where I started to get my information from on their site, I wanted to show you at least this screen cap of a timeline they had. And so I'm using a lot of the information in this timeline for our timeline in this video. And so I want to give them full credit for that. But I did extract a lot from here, and then I verified in the Wars of the Jews by Josephus just to solidify my references. The references in this chart have page numbers, which I'm not using them. I'm using the online versions. I tried to convert all of the references to a book, chapter, and verse reference, but just wanted to give a shout out to Bible.ca. Let me see. I think there's the reference down there at the bottom left of the chart. Bible.ca/Revelation is probably a landing page for a lot of prophecy stuff they've got. So encourage you to go there and support them. So let me get into the timeline that we will be looking at. So I went ahead and just put it in a Word document. I used as my references, I put a few different acronyms. A&T is Josephus Antiquity of the Jews. Wars is going to refer to the Wars of the Jews. And then EUS, there was actually quite a bit of information in Eusebius, Ecclesiastical Church History. It kind of mirrors Josephus, but he gives some additional date help there. And so that was useful as well. And again, I will put links to all these sources, plus everything I visited while I was doing this research to get this timeline together for you. So let's scroll down here. And this is not really going to be formal. I've just kind of recorded what I saw. There's so much information that would need to be gone through to, check and put all the events of the years up to and after AD 70 end. That's not what this is. It's a general view trying to put into time frames the major things that happened during the years leading up to 70 AD, the destruction of the temple and the city of Jerusalem, and then the few years after up to the siege of Masada, where the Jews were killed there. And so that's what we're going to do, and I'm just really going to read through these and make a few comments as we go. I started here in AD 62 because that seems to be when most of the serious and important signs and things started happening in relationship to the destruction of the temple and the siege of Jerusalem. But in 62 AD, we have here the apostle James is thrown from the temple pinnacle by the high priest Ananias and beaten to death with clubs. I have in some of my other videos, but I've put together a timeline of the apostles' death. So I merged that with these time frames here. So you're going to see through the few years leading up to and including 70 AD and afterwards. Also interspersed are the martyrdoms of the apostles, because those were happening at the same time as some of these other events. And so then on October 7th in 62 AD, that's the Feast of Tabernacles. Also, I put in some of the Jewish feasts that seemed very relevant. And the reason this Feast of Tabernacles in 62 AD seemed relevant was because right after that, or during, is when this man named Jesus ben Ananus starts running through the city daily, crying, "Woe, woe to Jerusalem." And he has in Josephus' Wars of the Jews 6.5.3, he has a whole spiel he gives. He's talking about woe to Jerusalem and that their destruction is coming. And he does this for 7 years. And it starts just after this Feast of Tabernacles in October of 62 AD. In 63 AD, I didn't find a lot of really notable events. There were obviously a lot of things happened, but in regards to the prophecies, the leading up to the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple, I didn't see a lot there, so I did not record any events in 63 AD. And I will be the first to admit there's likely that I missed some things, so just follow along with me and use this to your advantage as you study. In 64 AD, in July, was the Great Fire of Rome, when Rome burnt. And then, if you remember, during this whole time, 62 AD and forward, up until we see later on, Nero is the Caesar. So Nero is the Caesar, and it's during this Great Fire of Rome that he blames the Christians and the Jews on that fire, mainly the Christians. And so that's what's going on here in 64 AD. And also in that year, the Apostle Paul was beheaded by Nero in Rome. At least that's the traditional view of what happened. And then 65 AD, this is when all the major signs and miracles start happening that Josephus talks about in Wars of the Jews. You see that reference over there in chapter 6, section 5, verse 3. All these different signs are cataloged, and some of them last for a while, some don't, but just know that little section of Josephus has so much incredible, miraculous happenings that you need to read through that a few different times to get it all. But just to show what happens and when it is claimed to have happened, April 3rd, there's a light that shines down on the temple and the Holy of Holies for a half an hour in the middle of the night. And the priests recorded this. But it just, the whole temple and the Holy of Holies glows with the glory of God for that short period of time on April 3rd. Also on April 3rd, a star appears in the sky over Jerusalem in the heavens. And this star, it looks like a sword, and it lasts for an entire year, starting in April of 65 AD. Also, a comet appears in the sky right next to, along with the sword star. A comet appears in the sky, and it lasts for a year. It's seen for an entire year in the sky over Jerusalem. April 9th is the Passover feast, and I included that because that's the time all these signs start happening, is at or just before, just after Passover. On April 9th also, which is Passover, the east gate of Jerusalem opens by itself. And you may at first think that's not super significant. Why is that significant if a gate just swings open? Well, this gate, I don't have exact dimensions, but it's solid wood and metal. And it's seriously like 6 inches to a foot thick. And it's so tall and wide, it took like a dozen soldiers to open and close the thing every day. So this is not any little door. This is a huge gate through which horses and carts would enter. And it was the entryway to the city. So this was a major thing. It just opened by itself. It wasn't like it would free swing like that. It wasn't like if you pushed it, it would just keep opening. It was so heavy that this took constant pressure to open, and it opened of itself was remarkable and recorded by Josephus and the Jews. Also on April 9th, a virgin cow at some point walks into the temple, or is possibly one of the cows, heifers, that is meant to be sacrificed in the temple, but it gives birth in the temple during the day there, and it gives birth to a lamb. And so this is recorded by the Jewish priests, but it's amazing what I mean, how much more of an amazing sign could you need from God than that he's saying, my lamb, you're ignoring my lamb, and he sends this heifer into the temple, and it gives birth to a lamb in front of the priests. How much more obvious could God get with these people? Hey guys, sorry I had to cut away there. I realized after I made the video incomplete that I had forgotten a couple things in 65 AD that I definitely wanted to include, and I apologize for that. But here we talked about how the virgin heifer, the cow, comes into the temple and gives birth on April 9th in 65 AD. But then in May 16th of the same year, angelic armies are seen waging war in the heavens and around the cities in the area. They actually see heavenly hosts with armor, it says in Josephus 6:5-3, that they had armor and chariots, and that these armies were seen waging war, the angelic armies. And so, it harkens to me straight to Revelation chapter 12, where it talks about the war against Satan and his armies and Michael and his armies, between Michael's armies and the evil armies of the beast and Satan. And so this is exactly what they were seeing at that time. And then on June 2nd, which was Pentecost in 65 AD, the priests were in the temple, and they felt an earthquake and also heard the sound of a multitude of voices at the same time saying, "Let us remove hence." And this is all according to Josephus in that same chapter. But they felt this earthquake. That's another fulfillment of prophecy you can look up. But then a multitude of voices, I'm assuming spiritual heavenly voices, saying, "Let us remove hence." This was possibly the armies of God leaving the temple, Jerusalem and Israel was losing the protection of God's armies, and they were leaving them. Amazing stuff. So now I'll cut back to the original and let this whole thing finish out. I just didn't want to leave out those two events. So, catch ya. And then in 65 AD, we also record here that the apostle Thaddeus was crucified, purportedly by Magi in Persia, because he had gone to Persia to spread the gospel, and he was crucified there by the elite, by the establishment, the Magi. 66 AD, I didn't record anything of note that comes out of Josephus, but of course the wars were going on. There was a lot of things recorded in Josephus and the other historians, Tacitus, Suetonius, but I did not put anything on here because that's not the miraculous sign stuff that I was kind of looking for. And again, do your own research to see what else happened in these time frames. In 67 AD, and on February 6th, now what I did was, because I truly believe this is the period of tribulation that was talked about in the prophets, that Christ talked about, it was upcoming, and it was Daniel's times and half a time, 3.5 years. And it's in Revelation a few different times. In chapter 11, it's 3.5 years talked about, 1,260 days, 42 months. So it's all the same thing, and it's this time of tribulation up until the temple was destroyed. So what I did was I put the date of the temple's destruction into a date calculator, and I subtracted the 3.5 years exactly to the day. And I just noted that here. Sometimes the prophecies aren't to the day specific necessarily, but I put this date in so that we kind of had a marker for, this is when this tribulation period would have been said to have started. And this was around the time that the actual the war inside Jerusalem and outside Jerusalem started to get serious. So, we could say for some certainty this is the time of the tribulation. And then also in 67 AD, we need to note that the Jewish high priesthood really ceased at this time. And that would coincide well with the start of the tribulation. But in Josephus' Wars, book 4, chapter 3, verse 8, it says that the priesthood at this time, they were so corrupt that they actually chose the high priest at this time by drawing lots. And so that was not God's plan, not how God intended for it to happen. So it just shows the corruption of the priesthood and how it was totally bankrupt at this time. And this was really the end of the high priesthood of the Jewish nation. In 68 AD, on June 8th, I record here that Galba becomes Caesar. And June 9th is when Nero committed suicide, you see right below. So this is all in the same time frame, the same time, but Galba was the next Caesar after Nero. Nero commits suicide on June 9th, and so that was the transition of power for those Caesars. And the next three Caesars, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius, you'll see here in our timeline between 68 and 69 AD that they ruled for very short periods of time, like just a few months each. Because there was fighting, you'll see one is murdered, one commits suicide, etc., etc. And these are the three kings in Revelation that it talks about that are only in power for a short time. And so you can go to Revelation and read about that. But these are the matchups between what's in Revelation according to the kings or the horns and what's happening in history. And so very exciting, very interesting to me. When I found out that Galba, Otho, and Vitellius matched those three kings in Revelation, those three horns that ruled a short time, that was one of those things that blew me away. I was like, wow, I can't believe that history, God was so accurate in what he prophesied to John, what he showed John in Revelation. In 69 AD, January 15th is when Otho became Caesar after Galba had only been Caesar for like 6 months, 7 months. Otho becomes Caesar, and that's in Josephus' Wars, Book 4. April 17th is when Otho is murdered and Vitellius becomes Caesar. So that was a very short, January to April, 4 months, 3 months, another very short reign. And then December 22nd is when Vitellius ends up being beheaded and Vespasian becomes the Caesar. And then that's when he sends Titus's armies to Jerusalem to lay siege. And so again, Vitellius becomes Caesar in April and is beheaded by December. So again, it's like, 6, 7 months, 8 months. These reigns were very short, as is referenced in the book of Revelation. So on to 70 AD. Now on March 7th, Titus's army, which was sent by Vitellius in 69, they don't arrive until March 7th of 70 AD. So that's when they arrive with their catapults, their siege tanks, their weapons of war, everything they were going to use that ended up part of the siege of Jerusalem arrives in March. And also in March, that man, Jesus ben Ananus, who was going around the city for 7 years crying, "Woe to Jerusalem, woe, woe," he is then killed when the battle starts by a catapult stone, like immediately killed. And so it's interesting that, and I did do the calculation, it is 7 years and 5 months between when he starts and when he gets killed. So 7-year period. How prophetic is that? It's just incredible how all of the puzzle pieces here came together and God fulfilled so much prophecy with what happened in the first century. Then on the 9th of August 6th of 70 AD, the Jewish temple was burnt to the ground as a part of this siege. The armies of Titus had come into the city and they stormed the temple, they burned the temple. All the Jews that sought shelter inside the temple first they went into the temple. Actually, it says in Josephus, the soldiers were being called back by their commanders. They were saying, don't go in and slaughter all of them. They wanted to capture them at first, at least the commanders did. And they were calling their soldiers back, but it says in Josephus they were driven by rage. It was like there was something driving them, and I believe that was the power of the beast that's talked about in Revelation. The beast was using and abusing the Roman armies, and God was allowing this because of the judgment that he needed upon Israel for their wickedness. So the beast through the Roman armies was causing these soldiers to be enraged to the point they didn't hear their commanders. They didn't care. They were slaughtering every Jew they saw. And they followed them into the temple and slaughtered them so much that it said the blood ran out of the temple steps, down the temple steps like a waterfall. And this is what Josephus records. And also another note that I've understood after years of looking at these different things. You know where it says in Revelation that the blood would run up to the horses' bridles. Well, you know, we always imagine when we read that, we imagine, oh, there's some lake of blood that's going to be created. It's going to be deep, you know, where it's up to a horse's bridle, like, you know, 4 feet deep or 5 feet deep, just pure blood lit like a river. But that's not what it was like. What it was meaning was, as the soldiers are running through the temple area and they're slaughtering so many people and there's blood running all over the floor, what happens as horses are plodding through the blood and soldiers are running through the blood and waging war with all this blood all over the ground? What happens? It splatters. And the blood is splattering all over the place, and as they're running, it's just going up on them. And by the time the war is over, what do you see? You see soldiers all standing around with blood splattered all over them up to their necks, and horses with blood all over their legs and up to their bridles. And this is exactly what it's talking about. It's not talking about some time where there would be a lake of blood. It's saying the blood was all over them up to the bridles of the horses because they were running through it. They were killing so many Jews, and there was blood everywhere just being thrown around. And so this is truly what that means in Revelation when it says the blood would be up to the horses' bridles. And so we need to be careful when we read some of the prophecies, just to know that sometimes it means something that we're not seeing, and we think in a modern way about it. And we think, oh, there's going to be a lake of blood. But that's not the case. That's not what it meant. But this time, this event where they were slaughtered inside the temple, the blood ran out, and then what did they do? They burnt the temple to the ground. This was the great winepress of the wrath of God. I love that term in prophecy because it so perfectly explains what happens. And the vine of God, the Israelite nation, was gathered into the temple and then crushed like grapes, weren't they? Just like wine, the wine of the wrath of God. And this was the winepress of the wrath of God, this temple at this moment in history. In 70 AD, I'm about to get emotional just thinking about it. It's so incredible. God, you are so incredible for what you did. All praise and glory to God for this. It's amazing to think about what happened. But man, if you can read Josephus, book 6, it talks about all of this stuff. And man, Josephus in general you need to read, but this chapter is incredible. At this time also, during this time, the apostle Matthias was stoned and beheaded in the siege of Jerusalem during this time and in the year 70 AD, as well as the apostle Bartholomew, who was whipped or flayed to death with a whip in Armenia. All right, so just to see those things overlap. And then we're going to continue just a little bit because also in 70 AD, the apostle Andrew was crucified in Patras of Achaia, and this was recorded by Hippolytus. 71 AD, I didn't record any events, but in 72 AD, it was interesting, the Flavian Caesars had an amphitheater built, and they used Jewish slave labor to do it. So the Jews that weren't killed in the siege but were taken captive, they were forced into servitude, into labor for the Romans. And the Flavian emperors, which is Titus, Domitian, Vespasian, I believe, they forced the Jews into slave labor to build this amphitheater and other things in Roman cities. And then in 73 AD, now remember, this is 3.5 additional years after 70 AD. So it's 7 years from the start of the siege of Jerusalem, from the start of the tribulation in 67 AD. So 7 years from that point, in 73 AD, April 15th, the fortress of Masada is where all the Jewish zealots and the armies of the Jews fled to. They fled to Masada because it was a strong fortress up in the mountains, but the Roman armies had laid siege to it, and it took a long time, but they finally routed them. And in April, they destroyed the Jews, and the Jews wouldn't let themselves be taken captive. So and I read just in the study that they also have, it was against their beliefs, of course, with God and everything, to commit suicide and against their law. So instead of that, they committed group suicide where they all killed one another. It was very interesting, but they didn't want to be taken prisoner by the Romans. And so in 73, exactly 3.5 years after the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D., the Jews fall at Masada and are destroyed finally by the Roman armies. So that is the end of my timeline there. I think this is awesome for me to see, awesome for all of us really, but and just saying, it's like to see the events play out like that, and that they fulfilled so much prophecy in such a short time period. And the fact that most Christians, and myself included before just a few years ago, we miss it. We don't study this history, and we just, I don't know what it is and why it's now coming to light, but praise God that it is, because it helps us understand our place in His kingdom, which is a heavenly kingdom, but on earth we are supposed to bring the attributes of that kingdom to earth, and we're supposed to tell others about Him, and we're supposed to act as citizens of that kingdom, even though we are in the world. And then someday when we die, we go into that kingdom in heaven. And man, it's awesome to see how He fulfilled all His prophecy that He meant for the judgment of the Jews, and what Christ did in reconciling the Jews and all of us who follow Him and believe in God to Himself. Praise the Lord, and thank you for joining me with this timeline. I hope it's helpful to you. Like I always do, I will put links in the description, and I will put this also on my blog website, and that is bible-scribe.com. And so you'll be able to go there and see all the notes, including the timeline, and you can do this research for yourself, and maybe you can fill out the timeline more, but some of these videos, they get long, and I have to keep it short. So I stuck to the main things. But God bless you, and thank you for joining me again. Like and subscribe. Help me build out the channel and grow so others can see this information and join us in learning more about who God is and what He's done. So take care. Bye.